mainly write about the environment, and I'm here today to welcome you to the Conservative Environment Network at Conservative Conference. It's the independent network of Conservatives who care about the environment and decarbonisation and climate change. They have 18 events at conference this year. I think probably you've already had a few of them, but there's plenty more to come, so do check them out and come to more events. And sorry, that's what I've had to say.
It's true.
It's true. If you want to tweet about the event, you can tweet at CEN_UK with the hashtag CEN@CPC. And if you want to quote me, please make me sound clever. So I hope we're here today because our green and pleasant land, which is the envy of the world, is actually under threat. And we've lost, I think, 41% of our species abundance since the 1970s. And things are getting worse, they're not getting better. So the government has committed to protecting 30% of our land and seas by 2030. And they have committed to putting nature-based solutions in place to make sure that we don't lose any more of our beloved species, and in fact perhaps even return some, such as the beaver. However, is the government going far enough? A lot of people would argue that we haven't quite got there yet, or maybe that a lot of the things that they have said haven't started to be put into motion yet. And there's also quite a lot of opposition from some sectors on this. So we're here today to hear from people, both ministers, local government, NGOs, and an MP when she arrives, about their take on all of this. And then we're going to open the floor to questions, so give them a good grilling. First, we're going to speak to the Minister, Prentis, the Minister for Fisheries and Farming. And she's going to tell us about what the government is doing to reverse the decline in nature.
Okay, well, it's really nice to be in a room, for a start, that I can breathe in. The last room I was in really suffered from what you'd call in a poultry world overstocking. So it's really nice to have ventilation and room to move, just briefly, but it's good to see you all. And yes, come to all the CEN events. It's all right, I'm not talking at all of them. Other ministers are available. So this is a really, really exciting and important part of our agenda. In CEN, we have often talked about the importance of net zero, and yes, that is important, and it is right that we have targets, and it's right that we try very hard to meet them. But the bit that gets me really excited and worried is the crisis we have in biodiversity loss. And everything that we are doing in the Future Farming Programme is very much designed to boost farmers' productivity and to work hard on, carbon zero, net zero as well. But really, I am focused at the moment on reversing some of that biodiversity loss. So I am 50. In my lifetime, we have been effectively members of the Common Agricultural Policy. Our farmers, including my own farm, have been rewarded for owning acres. And it didn't matter what we did on those acres unless we were in a higher stewardship scheme, which many of us are, but not all. And we have, in my lifetime, as Helena said, really noticed losses in biodiversity, particularly in some farmland bird species where the losses are much, much higher than those that Helena mentioned, and really worryingly high. And frankly, unless we are able to reverse this decline very quickly, we are on track to lose a number of very beloved bird species that we have all considered part of our countryside and which really ought to be there. I'm very proud to be, actually I'm not sure if I am anymore now I'm the minister, but I'm still very proud to represent the corn bunting, which I did as a species champion. I think I don't do that anymore, but I still love them. And that is just one example of the type of farmland bird that really does struggle from loss of habitat. So where does this leave us? We have lots of targets for biodiversity. We have lots of specific funds, but much of government money and DEFRA money is targeted, truthfully, through future farming policy. And that's what I'm going to focus on when we have this discussion today, because I think this is where we can make probably the biggest change. So we are very much rolling out our agricultural transition plans. they're challenging. We're taking farmers' money from just being area-based and asking farmers to deliver public money for public goods. We're working on these new systems in conjunction with farmers. We have about 5,000 farmers testing things at the moment. And we are genuinely trying to do this in quite a brave way. We are changing things and learning from our mistakes as we go along, which is not a way that in my years as a civil servant that we tend to go about making policy. Normally we view a good way of making policy as setting out what the policy is and absolutely sticking to it. Well, that's not how we're doing future farming. We think the only way to do this, because this is so challenging for the farming world, is to do this in conjunction with farmers. And one good example of how we've made major change at the moment is the moorland standard, which we wrote, thinking it was right. first exposure to the real farming world, oh no, and we've made some major changes and we'll continue to do so, because those wader species, curlews and lapwings, for example, very much in decline, very big concern of mine and Lord Benyon's, and something that we absolutely have to get right and quickly before we lose more of them. So there are, this is the reason why the NFU is talking today about delaying the agricultural transition. I'm really sorry, I don't think we can delay. I think the 7 years that we have set out to bring about this transformation, not just transition, it is a transformation in the way that we are rewarding farmers, really needs to get going and is doing so now. So it's a really exciting agenda. It's not without challenge. We're focusing initially, because I think it is really important to focus on practical details. I don't want to take up hours of your time, but we're focusing initially on soil standards and hedgerows. And if anybody wants to get me really excited, they talk to me about herbal lays. Can I leave it there?
We'll talk about that later. Okay, thank you. So it's really important, obviously, to hear from a minister who can make the changes that are needed to reverse these problems. But actually, a lot of the really important work happens on the ground in local areas. A lot of people start the grassroots movements that then become sometimes government policy. And we've got here today Councillor MacBean, who has, I understand, been doing some excellent work in her local area. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Hi everyone. Forgive me, I won't stand. I have been overstocked for most of today, so I'm going to stay seated for this. So I'm a town councillor in Chesham in Buckinghamshire. It's been in the news recently, and I'm a Bucks Unitary Authority councillor in Buckinghamshire. One of the biggest pluses for us has been devolution to local level within our county, because what it's done is it's given us a much greater degree of local control. So simple things like managing the cutting of our own grass verges. What we've actually done in our town is we've turned over many of them to wildflower verges, which seems a very kind of small, simple thing to do, but it has massively increased the biodiversity. It's one small step. From there, we started to look at the land management of all of our green spaces. So we own several parks, several open spaces. And what we've done is we've changed to a much more natural way of managing them. So that's not cutting them frequently, actually allowing natural grass species to come through. We're seeing much more biodiversity. We've got rare orchids coming through, and we're seeing much stronger populations of invertebrates and other creatures and habitats. So it's all very positive stuff. We've got a bit of an obsession at the moment with tree planting, which is great because we have a tree planting project called Communitree, where we are actively planting trees back into our highways verges. So we're starting to green up our urban streets. We're actually starting to increase our tree canopy. We're managing water attenuation and solving some of our highways runoff problems. Not all of them. We'll always have an issue with block gullies, I'm afraid. But there are lots of good things happening. So through this land management change, we now have 3 large areas in the town that are actively managed as chalk grasslands, which actually can be much more biodiverse than planting huge numbers of trees. So it's some really good work going on, and one of our sites has now been designated a national local wildflower site, so we're very proud of that. And that's happened in a relatively short time, 4 or 5 years, and we've made huge improvements. So there are small steps that you can take, just changing cutting regimes, taking cuttings away to improve the soil, improve the diversity. The other things we're doing, so as a county authority, we are very ambitious. We have a plan to plant 550,000 trees, a tree for every single resident that lives in Buckinghamshire over the next 5 to 10 years. And we're looking to create 200 hectares of new woodland. Trees have their place to play. We also have, within our parks, we have ponds. We have one in my hometown, which is in a bit of a state. Scotto's Pond needs to be desilted. One of my local councillors is here grinning. We had a bun fight at Town Council on Monday evening. So, but it's very important because water and lakes and ponds and our river and canal networks can be very, very good carbon sinks and are equally as crucial. So there's a lot of work going on. We have county-wide initiatives like bucks buzzing, encouraging every single household to turn over space to wildflowers. It doesn't even have to be a large space. You can do it in a window box, in a tub on the patio. But what we do now is we don't talk about greenbelt anymore, we talk about the green web. And what happens is if every single house has a tub or a window box or a section of the garden, we create green stepping stones across our area, and that helps species to actually move across large urban areas. So a lot of good work going on. Hazelmere, they've got a project called B Squared where they actually gave away seeds to all the local houses. 1 in 20 houses now in a population of about 14,000 have actually got a wildflower patch. So it's an incredibly rich area in quite a built-up urban area. So what's next for us? We want to carry on improving our green web. So as a town, we're embarking on a neighbourhood plan. As a county, we are embarking on the new local plan. It's going to be a bun fight. We need to deliver housing. We want to deliver housing. I've got 20-year-old children that will need somewhere to live. But we are trying to prioritise brownfield sites and protect those greenfield sites, which is incredibly important to our local population. Our settlements are surrounded by Greenbelt and AOMB. We have a discussion going on at the moment about making the Chilterns into a new national park, which has got a lot of support locally. So it's really important that as we build these neighbourhood and local plans, that we actually build triggers into them and strong planning policy that helps to create richer, more biodiverse areas. And it is difficult because, you know, we're up against big developers, but also small developments of just a couple of properties. And that makes it very difficult financially to push developers to make these changes. But if we are going to make major change, then I'm very passionate about we have to really lead the way. So we need more strident planning policy as we develop these plans. We need basic mandatory requirements. We need to make sure that every single development has an EV charging point to meet the growing demand. I came to conference in an electric car and was very, very thankful for it because of what's happening with the fuel crisis at the moment. We need swift bricks built into every house so that we have species of birds that can nest in them and use them within urban settings. We also need to think about our future sustainability. How are we going to create space for carpools, car clubs, hoverpods? Who knows what's going to be thrown at us in the next 10, 20 years? We've got to actually challenge maybe looking at passive house standards and actually saying there is a minimum 75, 80, 100% of houses have to reach these standards, because that's the only way we're going to reduce our ecological footprint and improve efficiency. We've also got agricultural land management we've touched on. We are surrounded by greenbelt and we have a lot of farmers. Very small changes that our farmers make can have huge ramifications. Water, saving water. It may take 10 more minutes to plough a field slightly differently in a different direction, but it will keep water on the fields. It will help as our climate changes and we have longer dry periods. It also helps preserve that water and have it in the right place and increases biodiversity. We've also got some really big issues where in my part of the world we've got HS2 has landed in a big way, so I've got the North Portal and 3 vent shafts in my ward, and we have the Chiltern Society who are documenting the entire project from the air. I would recommend you go and look on their website. You know, it's a very difficult conundrum. We need large infrastructure projects for the economy, for transport, but the devastation that is kind of delivered upon us while it's happening, luckily they have some very strong mitigation plans, and we are pushing them at every opportunity to replant, reduce what is being stripped out in the first place. Thames Water, we have natural chalk streams within our area. So every time it rains, we have raw sewage discharged into our chalk streams. We need ministers' help, and we need policy change to stop that from happening. This is water that then goes through into our water table, into our aquifer, and we all drink it. So we'd like it to be a bit cleaner, really. Complacency. So everywhere I go today, I show my Chesham and Amersham pass and get the sympathy vote. Yeah, come on in. Yeah, we are now a marginal seat at best, and we will be fighting back at the next general election. But it is very important that everyone takes these issues seriously and starts to make small and large steps. These things matter to our voters, our residents, our neighbours, our constituents. And our recent by-election loss, part of it, greenbelt, development, loss of biodiversity, was weaponised and used as a tool. You know, elections aside, this is important. I want to see my children growing up in a healthy world, and my grandchildren, not just yet, a few years yet, but there are so many things we can do as local communities to actually improve our spaces. Thank you.
That's brilliant, and that's wonderful to hear just how much you do. I don't know how I have time for all of that. And now we're here to hear from the sponsor of this event, the campaign to protect rural England. And they have done some fantastic work on making sure that our countryside is not built over, and planning is done in a sensitive way and protecting our natural world. So let's hear from Crispin and Truman.
Thank you very much, Helen. I think I'll do the standing up thing for a bit of variety. It's really nice to hear from Councillor MacBean about stuff happening on the ground, actually. It's a really good bringing it to life sort of thing. So CPRE, the countryside charity, as we're now known, is very proud to be sponsoring this event, particularly as there's jam, donuts and beer at the same event. So is it tea? Is it early evening? I'm not sure. On for the jam donuts right now, so please leave me one. I'm really pleased to be doing this with Sen today. You know, nature-based solutions, countryside-based solutions, these are really absolutely important to CPRE, particularly because we're so much trying to change the dialogue about countryside. I'm glad you mentioned Greenbelt, because we want to get away from the idea that we're always having to defend against development on the idea that, you know, land is just there waiting to be developed. We've got to really emphasise the value, the importance of countryside and nature, and presenting it as part of the solution to the biodiversity and climate crisis is absolutely key. It changes the whole dialogue about this. And I'm glad you mentioned, Jane, the planning system as well, because that is also absolutely key to that changing dialogue. We're really pleased to see there's been a pause in the government's approach to the planning reforms, and with the new Secretary of State having come from Environment, we're hoping that will signal a bit more understanding that the planning system is one of the key tools to implementing the government's environmental agenda, particularly the 25-year Environment Plan and the Environment Act. Let's use the planning system to achieve that, and this is a perfect example of how that can be done. But it's also because presenting the countryside as part of the solution attracts people to our cause, and that's really important. Young people who are looking to find a way of tackling this global, overwhelming problem of the biodiversity and climate crisis. What can you do about it? Well, actually, countryside nearby particularly is a way people can get involved, and I'm really proud and pleased that both the Minister and the Councillor today are fantastic champions of their local CPREs. So, in fact, I've almost got nothing left to say because they're doing it all for us. But our vision at CPRE is of a beautiful, thriving countryside for all, and absolutely essential to that are, of course, not only peat, soils and trees, and I'm delightful to see the Woodland Trust here today, but also hedgerows. And we did launch our wonderful hedge fund, get the pun, report just a few weeks ago in Parliament. We had the first parliamentary event, so it wasn't just donuts, it was all sorts of cakes, and literally all the parliamentarians appeared because they couldn't believe it was a real in-person event. And it was great to have the Secretary of State there to launch it, and he also did an op-ed in the Telegraph that morning about it, so it got loads of great media. It is a great theme, hedgerows, and that's because they are so important, that they're so symbolic, a demonstration of what we mean by nature-based solutions and countryside-based solutions. But I think, as the Minister said earlier, or Helena said earlier, it's not all been good. And actually, CPRE back in 1926, don't like to say we told you so, we warned back then about the destruction, the indiscriminate destruction of hedgerows And the warning went unheeded, and since World War II, we've lost half our hedgerows in this country. And so that's just piling on top of all the other challenges that face the countryside: increase in flooding, soil degradation, the warming climate, and of course the threat of inappropriate development and the decline of species. So nature-based solutions, and particularly hedgerows, are key to that. We want to see more said about hedgerows. We think the government's doing some good stuff on soil and peat and trees. We'd like to see a bit of a hard target on hedgerows. So although the Environmental Land Management Scheme is talking about hedgerows, that's great. We'd like to see a hard target. So we're asking for 40% increase by 2050. And that is also in tune with the Climate Change Committee's own report in 2019 on net zero, which called for the same target. And with COP26 coming up, what better way to celebrate COP26 than to announce that target? And why are hedgerows important? Well, I know everybody in this room will know they're great for connecting nature. They're absolutely vital part of the English and British landscape, except in the Peak Districts, of course, where it's stone walls. It's not generalised, but mostly we see the hedgerows link the landscape for us. They symbolise often what it means to be in the English countryside, and visitors from abroad often say that. And as you all know, they support vast numbers of species. 130 of the UK's most endangered species, including the popular dormouse and brown dormouse, hazel dormouse, and hedgerows. And we're not alone. Not only the Climate Change Committee, the Dasgupta review also emphasised the benefit of this approach to biodiversity, providing natural dividends. And so the report shows it's not just about biodiversity and nature. Actually, there are hard economic reasons for putting hedgerows back and looking after the ones we've got. So going to the point about farming and farmers, although there may be some cost to them of some of the things we're asking them to do, they actually do enjoy an increase in crop yield and a drop in pesticide costs because of the natural pollinators and natural predators in hedgerows. So there are economic benefits to taking a nature-based approach to farming, which we think should be emphasised in the current debate the Minister mentioned earlier. Hedgerows also can provide wood chip for local renewable energy schemes, which is important. And of course, all citizens benefit from the climate change mitigation. There are 25,000 jobs, our report reckons, and this is independent research carried on our behalf. So if that target was adopted, it would create 25,000 jobs, many of those quite skilled, so not just hedge planting, but hedgerow laying, including herbal lays, I believe. Don't get too excited. So a very skilled job doing a herbal lay. I'm not sure I know exactly what it is, but I'm sure you'll tell me. So for every £1 spent on hedgerows, our independent research says a return of as much as £3.92, let's say £4 can be expected. And that's not to include flood alleviation and the annual health benefits for air pollution. So it's not just in rural areas, but I'm glad you mentioned street tree planting, street hedgerows, developments in cities. This is an urban target as well, and we can really have an impact on air pollution, which of course has huge health costs. So we would say that the question is not whether, but when and how and why not. Get that target in place. Let's get those hedgerows planting and looked after. And also, we want to hear about this in the planning system. So we want to see, as the Secretary of State rethinks the planning reforms, we want to see people and nature at the heart of the planning reforms to help secure the future of nature-friendly solutions in practice, because the planning system is key to making these things happen actually in practice. So thank you very much. I hope that's 3 minutes or maybe a bit more.
Yes, that's fine. So now I think we're going to ask some questions of our panel. But that was brilliant to hear from. Like, when I told my friends that I was doing a panel about hedgerows, a lot of them said it's not a very sexy topic.
Oh, it's so sexy.
How dare they?
Extremely sexy topic.
Look, can I just come in on that? In the last week, I'm going to show off now because I do not have a glamorous job. I spend most of my time dealing with muck and molluscs. It's a job I very much enjoy, but it's not glamorous. I went to see the world's greatest, most famous farmer. Would you like to tell me who that is? Oh, obviously. And do you know what we talked about? We talked about hedgerows.
Did you?
We did. And I sat down at the Conservative Business Lunch this very lunchtime with some very, very important business people. And guess what we talked about? Hedgerows. And do you know what they were doing? They were two of the members of this table I was sitting at completely randomly. I don't think they'd be specially selected on their hedgerowing skills, were members of community action groups, one in Wiltshire and one in Cambridgeshire, planting hedgerows.
Mad.
Mind-blowing. So it is sexy. Hello. We're on the sexiness of hedgerows.
Yeah. We're on the
Join
serious
in.
side.
Silence. is the MP for Stroud, and she is a nature champion in her local area. She's going to tell us about what she's been doing.
Thank you. Well, sorry about being late. I was on another thingy. No, listen, I mean, I am fortunate to be the MP and representative of the greenest constituency in the greenest county of Gloucestershire. I mean, I cannot tell you how many letters I get about the environment, which is just fantastic, but also loads of ideas and loads of passion and sort of and a desire for change. But one of the things I've been getting involved with is because we have the headquarters of the Wetlands and Wildflower Trust, WWT Slimbridge. So if you haven't been, please go or visit any of your wetland centres across the country. And because of that like local expertise and my love of flamingos and time down there with my little one, I am about to set up the all-party parliamentary group for wetlands and to look at wetlands around the country and also the Ramsar sites. And we have just the most incredible nature reserves here and desire for conservation arising out of that. And we've created, or the WWT team have created a plan to really regenerate wetlands that we have, but also try and create an extra 100,000 hectares of wetlands across the country to really look at kind of 4 main issues. And I apologise for looking at my notes, but I was conscious that I was running between things. 4 proposals for a blue recovery, which is sort of building on moving out of the COVID crisis, is to use our wetlands for a carbon storage network. Secondly, for natural flood protection, which we're already seeing incredible working flood protections in practice. An urban well-being network. I mean, if anybody sort of got stuck in their houses, or if any of you were in flats during COVID, there was a real appreciation for nature and the ability when the wetland centres opened up again, seeing people flood back in and sort of spend time down there was just wonderful. And then a water treatment network and working with our water companies across the country. So we've got a massive membership with WWT. We've got a country that is kind of green and thinking about these issues. And because of COVID, we've got some real passion and desire to make sure that we harness what we have in nature and enjoy it a little bit more. So yeah, please join my Wetlands APPG when it comes out. But yeah, and follow what we're doing. But I mean, the other panel I was just doing was just talking up what we're doing with net zero, and it all plays in. So yes, thank you. I hope that was okay. So I'm conscious I didn't see what everybody else is talking about.
No, it's wonderful because we're going to do some questions now from the audience if you have any, and if you don't, I've got loads, so it's fine. Anyone got a question? Hands up. Yes, at the back. Christine.
Hi. What can be done to inspire large landowning organisations, for instance, the Church of England, who hold the leases, Victoria will laugh at this, for hundreds, if not thousands of farms to include hedgerow treatment in their lease agreements?
For me?
Who's most passionate about this? You?
Oh, well, I'm obsessive, sorry.
I think but you first, then Crispin, and then
Okay.
Victoria. Okay.
So I think you mentioned that actually we've been recently talking to the church commissioners about some pilot projects. So we are looking at doing pilot projects with large landowners, because you're absolutely right, you need to scale these things up. But at least getting them talking about that and doing some practical stuff, looking for some funding for that would be a start. And that segues slightly nicely into, I wanted to mention our work on council-owned or county farms, because that's another way of demonstrating good practice in this area on farms that are in the public realm, owned by local authorities or community groups. And that council farms have been very neglected in recent decades. A lot of them are in Greenbelt, near to where people live. They're ideal places for testing out regenerative farming and new approaches and all the things we're talking about, and bringing new entrants into farming. So we're about to launch our vision for county farms at the end of the month, seeing as you mentioned it, which is an opportunity there to demonstrate. I hope that's helpful.
Give me the scoop on that, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. You can come.
On the Church of England land in particular, when we think about church land, yes, we think of the farms, which I know who Christine works for, so I know why she knows about the large amounts of farmland that's owned by the Church of England, but I think most of us would think about graveyards immediately when we think about land owned by the church. And certainly locally in Oxfordshire, we've got a really good innovation that I think the Lord Lieutenant is pushing, to encourage each country church with a graveyard to plant some trees for the Queen next year as part of the general project, which I think is a great idea. We've also been talking about no mow or occasional mow or no mow May, or mowing less often, can we put it that way, and having a wilder area if that's acceptable locally in graveyards to increase wildlife. In terms of the church's farmlands, and I think that there are other very large landowners in the country who we're very much trying to reach, we go back to our agricultural policies and how important they are. And I do think, hedgerows are, I think, very, very both sexy and important. But I think it's important that we think wider than the hedgerow. So we should be thinking about tree planting. We should be thinking about tree planting in hedgerows. Now, that's the way to get Rebecca Pound really going, let me tell you. And also, we should be thinking about areas that we fence and effectively let plant themselves, which is a very good way of increasing biodiversity. But I want to focus as well on what we do, so farming and biodiversity gain together, so what we do in the field too, which is where herbal lays come in. So planting the crop and planting something else underneath, or planting strips. And I think the more we can talk about this as part of farming and as part of food production, the better.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I think Rich Siobhan's dying to come in.
Sorry,
Just coming in, because I went to, in my constituency, I went to visit a project called Zero Dig, which is a zero no-till project, and they're turning over. They're actually farming with a really kind of biodiversity-focused way, and they're amazing scientists, really commercial brains, and what they want to do with the Zero Dig project is create a working model that can be exported to a bit of a rugby pitch that isn't used, or a bit of a church land that isn't used, or just somebody that's got some hectares that they're not using, and I think that actually there's some nervousness about doing things. I mean, even our farmers are nervous about planting trees because they've seen schemes come and go in the past, and they've got tiny little wilting trees with tubes around them, and they've had to spend money on themselves to try and make happen. So I think the ability to prove a working model and give real guidance, I think is really key to give confidence for the changes, and it is happening, and youngsters want to get involved as well. There's some real energy coming from young people, even if they're not agri. And Clarkson's farm, if you ever watch that brilliant, he's like, I'm going to create a wetland down there because I've read that looks good and it's good for the good for nature, and he did it, and I know he's got lots of land and lots of cash, but it's proving that things can happen, and if we're committed enough, we can make the change.
That's a brilliant point, yeah. He has actually really inspired a lot of people, and he likes digging as well. He said he finds it fun to go down in his digger digging up ponds. He did about 60, he wanted to do 60, he said, didn't he?
I think there's real value in that, because I think public figures like Clarkson actually spread the message to the masses. So, it is very important to bring people on those journeys, and we have had issues within our town. When we introduced our wildflower verges, we've had one verge where we've literally had a resident go out in the middle of the night and cut the grass to the point where he's done it for months. We've actually abandoned it now because one way or another they will move on in a few years' time. So, hopefully to a new home. But sometimes they are a force of nature in their own right, and they do not want to see wildflower verges or new projects. I mean, people who do not want trees planted in their local street because they want to park a large car on the grass verge, because parking is an issue in every town, village and city across the country. But it is important to bring people on that journey. And so what we did with Community, we actually launched it so that residents could nominate the sites of where they wanted to put trees. And we had one street where we had one resident 30 other houses adamant there is no way we're having trees, and I think we're up to about 27 now, because we put the first one in and literally on the same day we had people coming out of the house going, oh, actually I quite like that, it looks really nice, and you know, my grandchildren come home from school and tell me we've got to plant more trees, can we have one as well? And we keep going back, and so we've pretty much effectively turned that street into a tree-lined avenue, and it hasn't been that way for about 6 decades. So you know, so you've got to bring people on that journey, otherwise you do meet resistance, and it does make it hard, and it does make for public battles over, you know, those few strong voices that try to stop projects. But once people understand, and the Wildflower Verge is actually putting, first year was a little bit of a battle, but second year putting in simple stakes with signs on explaining how we're managing it as wildflower site. It's not just the council can't be bothered to cut the grass, because it's actually more time intensive and more costly, because we have to buy new machinery to take the cuttings away, we have to manage it to take out invasive species like ragwort. So we are putting more effort, our parks team are spending more time, and you have to educate people so that they actually embrace these new ways of managing the land.
Thank you. Have you got any more questions? Has anyone been waiting for ages? Who for a question? Okay, maybe you in the front. Sorry, I'm not very good at seeing who's. I'll come to you next. White dress, yeah? Okay. Okay, we say who we are as well, maybe. Yeah.
I've been nervous talking now. Family death goes, so don't speak loud enough, please tell me. In lockdown, Lancashire County Council bought a stately home, it was not a stately home, a grade 2 listed property up on the market for auction. This property had just under 8 acres, and it was woodland, and we had deer, and it happened to be in the middle of a county estate. It was actually sold before it went to auction for a ridiculous amount of money. And the person that bought the property, in the middle of lockdown, at the beginning of the first lockdown, cut all the trees down. And residents were powerless to do anything. It was just an area where people took their dogs, the deer, and we were powerless to do anything. I've set up a group to save Larches woodland. It's far too late, we can't get those trees back, but we want to reinstate that woodland for the people of Larches and Preston. I'm fighting a losing battle because the person that bought it had plenty of money, and it's almost like bribery. He'd just given $30,000 for the local hospital. So it's a divided community. The people on the council estate up in their arms have lost their little bit of woodland, and it was my dream to restore that. Why are Lancashire County Council, where I'm from, selling pieces of land like this that are very valuable for the community? I do understand the property was in a state of disrepair, but the community weren't even given the option to make it their own, and I found that really disappointing and quite upsetting. We've raised £1,500 to fight it when it goes to planning, but we know we're going to lose without any proper support. We just want to get this bit of woodland back for the community that they didn't want to lose.
It's terrible that's allowed to happen. I always argue to people that we protect historical artefacts, and we look after them really well and say, look, it's part of our history, this artifacts. But actually, I think that our natural capital is just as important, our natural heritage, and maybe it should be protected like a listed building, shouldn't it?
There are some triggers. So I've sat on the planning committee for the last 6-7 years, and we do have some protections, but you have to actually identify your spaces. So you can have assets of community value designated. What it does is it puts protection on so that the community are allowed 6 months to try and raise the money to purchase that asset or that piece of land before it's given over. Yeah, I mean, it has been a very difficult, not defending that particular council, I don't know the circumstances, but it has been a difficult 2 years, but also, increasingly budgets are coming under pressure for very good reason. If there isn't the infrastructure to manage the land, and sometimes you enter into negotiations with potential purchasers thinking they're going to do one thing and they're going to do another. We've got a difficult site at the moment where someone applied for planning permission for a barn with a dehydration system to produce kimchi, a Chinese cabbage. I cannot confirm nor deny whether it would end up being a marijuana farm, but there are all kinds of speculations circulating around the neighbourhood. But what happened was, I know, well, yeah, allegedly, I have to say. So what happened was, we actually refused it because the barn was huge. I personally suspected it was a backdoor development to actually put a house in a part of the AOMB in the Greenbelt. We see it all the time, and you kind of almost feel the creep coming. So we refused the application, so he went out and chopped down half the trees on the land in 2 days. Now, as a landowner, he has every right to do that, because unless those trees have a TPO, a tree protection order on them, what we have discovered, though, you can use Article 4 notices. So if you think there is a valuable piece of land in your area, please do talk to your local planning authority and try and open that conversation, because they can put protective orders on. And they're not designed to stop changes of management, but they are designed to encourage positive conversations about how that land should be managed. Community up in arms because all the trees have been lost. It's actually quite poor quality willow, self-seeded willow scrub land, and actually the land would be much better value to all of us if it was grazed as chalk grassland. Unfortunately, we now have a little bit of a battle going on with, as you say, a very difficult character who's got very firm ideas of what he wants, and we don't know what will happen.
Take TPO seriously. If the tree cut down the TPO, they don't follow it through. It just doesn't really mean anything anymore, TPO.
Can
So,
I,
yeah,
can I
wants to talk about it.
just more broadly, I do think that the access conversation is one that is really, really important to have. So in the Agriculture Act, we have for the first time said that we will be able in the future to reward farmers financially for allowing people, or indeed welcoming people, onto their land. And we found in the pandemic that there's been a real sea change in the understanding that we all have, you referenced it earlier, Crispin, of being outside both mentally and physically, actually. It's good for everybody, and I think we've all really, really started to talk about that and want to do it. However, in all the visits I make to farmers, a repeated complaint is about the way that people behave when they're on their land. And I met a nice young farmer in the Lake District earlier this week who said he spent all day putting out those temporary bonfires, those disposable bonfires. And we have got to learn to manage this better. So I think it's right that we now have the legislative background for doing this. But I also think that we need to encourage the way that that conversation about access happens. And perhaps we talk about temporary access and access when the crop allows it, and indeed the wildlife benefit from it rather than otherwise.
You had a question, didn't you, in the front of the green shirt? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bruce Buckland. I'm an architect by profession, but I have a keen interest in biodiversity and live in the countryside. I wanted to ask about hedges. Obviously, the largest loss of hedgerows was around the post-war period when vast amounts were ripped up. It's great to hear you're encouraging the sort of restoration of existing hedgerows and I suppose protection of them as well. What is the government doing? I suppose this is a question to the Minister. What is the government doing to encourage farmers and landowners to not only protect existing hedgerows, but replant old ones or plant new hedgerows, and making that both financially viable and sort of sustainable in the long term in terms of their business model?
Great question, yes.
So, quite a lot, actually. And for the details, I would refer you to our agricultural transition document, which is all online, and the DEFRA blog, when we have a specific hedgerows section, actually. So, yes, farmers and environmentalists are very often exactly the same people. But we, as I said earlier, we are completely changing the way that we reward farmers for public money for public goods. So farmers will be rewarded for planting new hedgerows and looking after their existing hedgerows in a different way, and also looking after the margin very often next to the hedgerow, which is an area that is very, very rich in biodiversity often. So I think you can say that we're definitely doing it in financial terms, and as we develop our future policies, both at the entry level tier, so the Sustainable Farming Initiative, and also in the middle tier, which is, there's a lot of talk about the upper tier, which is landscape change, really, which is sexy, to go back to our earlier word, and attention, headline grabbing, if you like. But a lot of the biodiversity work that we're hoping for is going to happen in the middle tier of our future farming policies, where we encourage groups or clusters of farmers to work together, say in a valley, or in an upland area, or in any geographical area where a group of farmers sit cosily and happily together. They don't all have to be involved, but the more the better, frankly. And what we find then is that you get webs, as Jane said, you get networks for wildlife, and the join-ups are what are super exciting. My colleague Zach Goldsmith talks very passionately about river wood schemes, and riparian schemes are very much a part of where we want our future farming policies to go, and where there will be rewards. Many farmers have either a river or at the very least a small watercourse through their land, and it's a very good place to not plant up to the edge.
Any more?
Yeah, no, I was just I was very fortunate the minister came to speak to some of my farmers quite recently, and you can see, she's a farmer herself, you can see them visibly relax and think, it's going to be all right, we're going to be fine, this elm stuff's going to work. But the reality is they're so busy and they're so stretched and they're worried, So I will be on the minister's back to make sure this works, but I think the getting farmers to work together is a fantastic idea, but we've got to create sort of working examples and the pilots that give them that support to do it, because I actually saw Rachel front wince when the lady talked about trees being ripped up, and it's the same with hedges when you kind of look back, but the bringing about that change is actually quite hard, and getting all the councils to work together and the planning commissions and mapping and understanding is really difficult. And I'm rambling slightly, but I just don't want to. I don't want Minister to ever think that we can't forget how difficult this is going to be on the ground. And that's not because you do amazing work, and I'm genuine. But I think it's going to be tough, and I think it is going to be everybody involved as we move forward.
Well, they're even protesting about it today. The NFU saying they want BPS to be extended. Just like it's not ridiculous, but it is kind of depressing to hear that they don't think it's workable for the next couple of years.
It is challenging, definitely. We are changing the way that we as farmers have been supported by the state for a very long time. So I'm not in any way complacent about how difficult this is for the farming world. And also, as Siobhan says, farmers are busy people. This is more admin, more forms to fill in, though we hope in the end to do it in a much more whole farm and this is the word I get laughed at for using a lot, holistic way. But the aim is to make it farm up, fewer forms, fewer slightly random penalties, which is what we suffered from under CAP. But it is a leap of faith for all of us. The problem, we've just got to do it. It's difficult for us in DEFRA. We're sure it's the right policy, but we understand why people are nervous. But we have got to press on. We have not got time to waste.
Yeah, and we only have 10 minutes left, so we have a couple
no
more.
time to waste.
Green dress.
Hi, thanks. I'm Tess Colley from Ends Report, a journalist. I wanted just to pick up on what we were just talking about. George Eustace said a few months ago that we'll need almost universal uptake of elms from farmers in England to actually reverse and do all the changes that the government says it wants to do. And what would you say to the concern that you're putting too many eggs in that elm basket? What are you doing to try and make sure enough farmers, if we need universal uptake, what are you doing to make sure they do sign up and they do it?
Well, the more who sign up, the better the environmental outcome. So obviously our ambition is very high in terms of uptake. This is nevertheless very challenging for farmers, so we are doing it in a transitional way, and we're giving ourselves 7 years to do it. But what we've said, and this government is definitely pro-farming and pro the environment, and do not see those two as in any way counterintuitive. And farmers and environmentalists in my head, and indeed in my background, are exactly the same people. We have said is that we will give the same amount of money in this Parliament to supporting farmers, but that money will now be targeted, instead of just owning land, at people who are providing public goods. So what we're doing is gradually reducing BPS, which is just the area-based subsidy, and slowly increasing the new payments for new schemes. This is transitional. It is messy. It is difficult. And we are in the interim, while not everything is yet in place, and while we're still testing and trialling with 5,000 farmers the new schemes, we're bringing in, we're encouraging farmers to join countryside stewardship schemes, for example, still, which are great for the environment and absolutely we won't penalise early adopters, if you like, in the future. We very much want people to get with this programme, and you mustn't wait for our schemes to be ready to do so. So join a countryside stewardship scheme is the message, and we'll move you over as and when the new schemes are ready. We will have this transitional period, which will be, slightly challenging for everybody, but we've got to manage it, and we will manage it. And I am quite sure that this will work. And in the future, my whole career has been a very, careful civil service lawyer. I don't like to do things that are referred to in civil service terms as courageous. This is an unusual way to make policy, but I think we've got to do it this way to keep the farming industry in the programme and to do the right thing for them as well. And I think that's really, really important. So what I want is for the farming minister in the future to be able to go to the Chancellor of Exchequer in the future, quite frankly, of whatever colour that government is, and say, farmers deserve public support. They're producing food, they're running their businesses, we hope in a profitable way, and they're doing their bit for the environment. And I want on-farm biodiversity to be completely transformed. I went to the G20 in Florence recently to meet agricultural ministers from across the world, and they thought we were brave, which I think is a good thing. They also thought what we were doing was experimental, but they were so excited by what we were doing. And really, I genuinely think this room is having some of the most exciting conversations in this conference. This is challenging, but we have got to do it. And some people think we're going too slowly, some people think we're going too fast, but whatever, we've got to get that balance right so that I can get the farming community on board and joining in.
And Crispin wanted to come in briefly, didn't you?
Yeah, that's a very good question indeed. And we would support the Minister and, of course, endorse the difficulties you cite for farming. Not easy, but absolutely, you have to get on with it. There is a transition already in place, and it is, after all, a nature and biodiversity emergency, so we do need to get to it. So we strongly support your sticking to it. But we do think it's really important. You are talking about a test and learn phase. You've got to monitor very clearly the uptake, and it's a very good question, and also the actual effect it has on the management and health of hedges and hedgerows and nature and wildlife, and then do something about it if the uptake is only partial. And I think some hard targets along the way will need to be adopted, because there will be some farmers who don't take it up.
And pink shirt question. Sorry,
Pink shirt.
Yes. It's a nice shirt.
Thank you very much. I completely agree, by the way, that it's all the excitement coming off the table is completely clear. It's the most exciting, it's all fizzing with energy at this table in front of us. My question is on artificial turf. So this is obviously happening a lot more. We have many more wildflower gardens and things like that. But I mean, my view is they look absolutely foul to begin with, so I would be tempted to ban them. But should we be discouraging them? We should be looking at maybe banning them because of the effect they can have on drainage and biodiversity, etc. Thanks.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting debate. So, as the mother of 2 teenage girls who played football, AstroTurf actually can increase injuries in sports people. So you don't slide, you don't kind of rip up grass, you get a lot of ankle and knee injuries, but it gives you all-weather pitches. So we've just introduced a 5G pitch at our local academy, secondary school. Highly controversial because it's right on the edge of Greenbelt and AOMB, but we have a lot of children from very diverse backgrounds who do not have access to playing pitches and sports clubs and actually the benefits that they reap from it. So there is always a bit of a tug. Artificial grass, I mean, it may have its place somewhere. Personally, I agree with you. Yeah, exactly. So I think we do need rules. You know, I mean, from a planning point of view, I do cringe when I see, you know, I mean, it looks very lovely with plastic flowers and plastic grass, and we all have our own, you know, kind of taste, and we shouldn't judge others. But I would like to see it banned. But it also plays into those planning, those in certain respects. There you go. I'm going to be judgy. I'm going to go for it. But also, it plays into the bigger planning conversation about how we manage those spaces. And there's a fine line between public spaces and private space where you should be allowed to do what you want to do with your private space. But one of the big things we have in Chesham, we have 6 tributaries that meet under our town. You dig more than 2 spades down, you hit water. In the driest summer, we have floods. And it's built in a valley, so everyone's on the side of a hill, and at the top of the hill, you still hit water. So we're seeing a proliferation of people paving over their front gardens to create parking spaces, dropping curbs, putting artificial turf in. The amount of runoff it creates, the pressure it puts on the highways team to actually keep all that water. The water it wastes, it's not going where it needs to get to. We've got a lot more concrete with runoff. We've really got to address these issues, and you know, we have some planning tools. If it's over 5 square metres, then you have to apply for a planning permission. Well, if I had £1 for every one that didn't, and I drive our poor enforcement team mad because I'm like, right, number 3, number 6, number 9 in that road have all just paved over their front gardens. But that turf, you're absolutely right, does not kind of bring any real benefits in terms of water management, and it's usually sand underneath, so there's no good quality, there's no air, there's no sunlight that gets through. So I'm with you. Go pink shirt. Let's ban some AstroTurf in certain situations.
Take as many questions as possible, so I think I'm going to move on and keep questions and answers short, so I can do a couple. Okay, so you in the front.
Thank you very much. Hi, Richard Hosking from Southwest Devon. My question is with regard to the headline, 40% loss in biodiversity and species, which is quite alarming. And in fact, I think probably everyone shares that alarm. When you actually look for the data to actually support that headline, it's a little bit sparse, to say the least. There are some very dedicated voluntary organisations that follow certain species very closely, but we don't have a comprehensive scientific database against which to actually judge the effectiveness of the policies we're trying to introduce. Do you have any plans to do that?
I guess that's one for...
Is that one for me?
And to when you can answer as well.
I think that there is a certain amount of science that we have, and certainly the department has access to. We have quite a lot of data on some species, and you're right, not a lot on others. And that's always been a concern. And we also have some excellent NGOs, sorry, you wanted us to go fast, in this space as well. So the RSPB is a fount of information. One of the things that worries me, and I've asked for further work in the department on, is checking species that of course can be very variable around the country. So curlews in one area can be a real concern, but not at all in another. And the same of many, well, most birds, truthfully. The other thing that we need to focus on more, and I know I won't go on now, but is bug life, which again is something, as we increase what we know about our soils, I think we will start to learn to use insects as a way of measuring the quality of those. Sorry, I think
Just very quickly, so we have the Bucks and Milton Keynes Environmental Record Centre. So we've just had one of their officers come out and do an audit of we've got Lowndes Park, very large park in the town centre, the lungs of the town. And in an hour, they've managed to do a count of every invertebrate, a little bit more funding, a few more of those around the country. And I think what we'll see is a lot more data coming through. And so if you have one of those environmental record centres in your area, please do help to support them and lobby your council and your ministers and your MPs to actually make sure they have sufficient funding to carry out this kind of research.
Local people tend to know best actually what's in their local.
Absolutely.
And it's very local.
Yeah.
Farmers can tell you every
I think one
Yeah,
thing I would
citizen
say.
science is part of the answer to this.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that I think there is a lack of joined up thinking with some of the data sets and looking at where the gaps are. But there is a real paucity of expertise in quite a few councils now. So for any councillors in here that are in control, you know, please do think about make it an election pledge or whatever you want to do. But try and find some cash for your tree experts and for your nature experts. So I think it will go down well with local people. It'll also allow you to make those decisions where you are kind of pulling in information. But on biodiversity, you know, carbon emissions, you know, people get very, very confused with all the science and the catastrophizing. You start talking to people about insects and species and the decline, and they will know what you're talking about because they'll see it. There's, you know, lack of it on the windscreens, the birds are not calling. That is how we win people around on this environmental agenda. So I completely agree with you about, you know, the science and the data, but let's not lose that narrative because it's very powerful.
And I think we do have to wrap up because it is half past now. Sorry, we have a very passionate panel.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No, it's good though because it's good that everyone's so knowledgeable. They have so much detail to share with everyone. But I guess if you see us around, or not, I'm not an expert, but I'm kind of a journalist. Yeah. Ask these guys if you have any questions and see them around conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a good